Hey,
Hey,
welcome everyone to another Windows Wednesday. My name is Kayla Cinnamon. I'm a program manager at Microsoft, and today I'm joined by Hayden Barnes. How's it going,
hey,
Hayden? Oh,
going
sorry.
great. Oh, you're good. My name's Hayden Barnes. I am a senior engineering manager at SUSE Rancher, where I focus on Windows. We do some internal DevOps work, and I lead the docs team.
Awesome. So, I want to talk about development on Windows and how Linux and Windows are besties now, and how we can work together to use Linux workflows on Windows, Windows workflows with some Linux aspects, and get into all of that.
Sure. Yep, I
So,
have
yeah.
kind of unique background on this. I've been using Linux for a long time. But it was WSL that brought me kind of back to Windows. And I got involved heavily in the WSL community kind of a couple years ago and ended up leading WSL efforts at Canonical on Ubuntu on WSL for a while before I diversified my portfolio a little bit, moved over to SUSE Rancher, where I do a little bit of WSL, but I focus also on things like Windows containers but cross-platform Windows, Linux stuff has always been my passion. So I'm really excited to be here and talk about this.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, what kind of workflows do you like to do with Linux on Windows?
On WSL, I do my favorite programming language. I have kind of a niche preference. It's called NIM. Not a lot of people have heard about it, and I code in NIM, and there are some really great extensions for VS Code that lets you develop in NIM with WSL. And what I like most about it is the ability to cross compile for Windows and Linux with basically just a few flags on the compiler line. So I can build an app, usually a small terminal based app, and then test it in Linux and Windows. In fact, I've written a few apps just for my personal use that work in both Linux and Windows. And it really, the apps like figure out where they're running and then just
Hmm.
work with WSL. So they're like, oh,
Oh,
hey,
cool.
you're running me in WSL
Hmm.
uh, on Linux. I'm going to do the thing you asked me to do here. Or, hey, you've called me from, my Windows binary, and I'm going to do this, apply this WSL setting this way. So I really like the level of integration that WSL provides between the Windows and Linux environment.
Yeah. So, the applications that you're making are essentially like OS aware because they know where they're being run and then change the settings accordingly.
Yeah, yeah. Usually to
Pretty
make
sick.
little WSL tweaks and fun things like that. So,
Yeah. And you mentioned that you like to make command line apps. Have
yes,
you played around with the WSLG graphic Linux app support?
absolutely. So, I was super excited about WSLG, really enthusiastic. We had kind of ad hoc GUI support for WSL previously. You needed a third party X server. Audio support was kind of hacky to make work.
Mm.
But then WSLG came along and provided, which is next generation Linux graphics layer, and Pulse audio support. So, I can fire up some of my favorite Linux GUI apps and even
Hmm.
test um, GUI apps that I might write. Again, I don't do a lot of them, but when necessary, if you're building Linux and Windows GUI apps, you can now use WSLG to test and compile those side by side on the same device.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Are there certain Linux apps that you like to gravitate towards when you're working on Windows?
So m- when I'm on the terminal where I spend a lot of time, my favorite, I don't use V or Vim. I use Nano. I'll just admit I use Nano. But if I need something a little bit more than Nano, but I don't necessarily want to fire up code, I'll fire up gedit, which is the
Okay.
Genome Editor, which has some nice defaults. Usually the first thing I install on a fresh WSL install where I'm going to be using, uh, GUI apps is gedit. Like, does gedit go? That was my test, and I use gedit.
Cool. And so you've been kind of with the WSL journey for a long time, the whole time? I don't think WSL is all that old. How have you liked seeing like WSL 1 go into WSL 2 and those kinds of improvements there?
So WSL dates to 2016,
Okay.
and I really started getting involved in 2017, 2018. Um, the funny thing is, I had been a longstanding Mac user, and at that point, my MacBook Pro was getting older, and that was back when, no shade on Apple, but there were some keyboard issues with the MacBook Pro, and I looked around and I was like, you know what? I have a lot of friends talking about these ThinkPads, and
Mm.
I want to try one of these Lenovo ThinkPads. And so I picked one up off eBay and threw Windows on there and gave WSL a try and was instantly hooked. That was back when we had WSL 1, which
Mm.
was the binary translation layer. Um, it was super cool technology that basically let you run Linux binaries on Windows inside these what they call Pico processes
Mm.
that would translate Linux system calls to NT system calls. But if you're a systems programming nerd, you're like, oh, that's actually really cool. Um, but then shortly before Build 2019,
Mm.
um, the WSL2 was announced, and that is the WSL powered by a actual Linux kernel. So
Mm.
it no longer has the challenges of trying to fit all of the Linux system call nuances, and there are a lot. Um, the team did a really great job getting system call compatibility, but there were, so many little edge cases uh, out there um, that having the full kernel and the full Linux ABI present and running really changed the game and let us do all kinds of crazy, cool things. One of my most popular blogs is about using nested virtualization inside WSL2, and that's something that's only possible because of having a kernel there with
Mm.
those KVM extensions um, enabled, so you can actually then run you know any other operating system you want inside Linux on Windows.
Yeah, that's definitely like a mind twister. Being able to do that, like, because it's already one thing that you have Linux on Windows, let alone a third inside Linux
Right.
on side Windows.
But it's
Um,
so it's
yeah,
so lightweight,
yeah,
the WSL layer, that then throwing are there a lot of practical applications for doing that? Maybe not. It's fun to try, to boot a desktop distro,
yeah.
inside, a virtual machine. But being lightweight and so powerful, one of the things that WSL2 can do really well is things like containers and cloud native development, and that requires a certain level of power and kernel functionality that WSL2 provides. Um, and you see things like Rancher Desktop uses WSL2 as the backend for a local Kubernetes distribution, and other tools, similar tools. So beyond the fun stuff, there are practical applications to be able to run containers and VMs inside WSL2.
Hmm. Yeah, so you mentioned WSL2 came out a few months before Build 2019. That's where we met
Uh-huh.
because Terminal came out at Build 2019 as well. Um, how was that whole experience for you from your perspective of like the command line kind of getting a new rejuvenated experience towards it?
Well, I saw that sizzle reel, and I still go back and watch the Windows Terminal sizzle reel that came out. Um, Even the song bops pretty hard.
It
I
does.
enjoy it. Yeah.
It does.
When it's on my like personal boost up playlist, on
Oh,
Spotify.
awesome. Nice.
So yeah, that seeing that was awesome. And then at your booth, you took down Windows Console and put up, the
Yeah.
Windows Terminal sign, and then you unveiled it. And I saw it. One, it looked good, like it just looked nice, and you saw from the sizzle reel kind of an idea of where you were going with it.
Yeah.
And since then, it has so surpassed what I could even have imagined at the time in terms of functionality, uh, design. I mean, it just looks great. And I mean, credit to you, it has helped define some of the other graphical elements
Mm.
we now see in Windows 11. In my opinion, I see the influence flowing out from there into other applications. Um, and that's props to you and your team. Um, but I think it looks great, and it demonstrated the commitment to um, the terminal and command line, that kind
Hmm.
of the legacy environment, which was useful for backwards compatibility, but it showed, hey, there's actually going to be a future here beyond just backwards compatibility. We want power users who are going to use the terminal to actually have an enjoyable experience here.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I love that you mentioned that Terminal now looks, almost as good or just as good or better than the video because like my team has been saying, Kayla, the Terminal doesn't look good yet, and I'm like, I'm working on it. We're getting acrylic, like all these things. And that would just be a lot of my, peers telling me it doesn't look like the video yet. You gotta keep working on it. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I
No,
think
I
it
mean,
looks
I think
better
it.
than the video.
Oh, sweet. I will
Yeah.
quote you to my management. Like Hayden says we're good, so
Yeah.
um, yeah, that sizzle reel was my first project at the company. Because I started like March before, or in February before that build in May, and they're like, you need to make this video of the command line, and it needs to be awesome. And I'm like, the command line? Like, you want me to? Okay. So it was a fun take of what we were looking to do with Terminal and then move forward from there. And that song is a bop. We almost went with this like cool ethereal like whooshy song and then the video company we're working with were like, oh well, what about this one? And I was like, oh that's good. And one of our developers, Mike Greasy, went to the YouTube video of that song and it only had a couple hundred views on it, and then he said, see you on May 6th, and then all of a sudden on May 6th all these people came to like, oh, I'm here from the Terminal video, and I'm like, that's so cool. So
Yeah,
it
that's
was
great.
definitely a fun part of build and being part of that whole journey and then seeing it come together and people really like it, and it works really well with WSL, at least in my opinion, because you can have those profiles and then customize things from there and whatnot.
Yeah. I extensively customize my OpenSUSE Tumbleweed profile. Yeah.
Nice. And
Yeah.
another piece of the trifecta, I think, is Power Toys.
Yeah.
Um, what are you, how do you feel about Power Toys? What are your favorite toys? I'd love to know.
Um, Gosh, it well, I mean, keeping track of all the new power toys is hard. Because they're constantly being added, and that's something. Uh, the community engagement around both Windows Terminal and Power Toys has been
Hmm.
really exciting. Seeing all those features not just be proposed, but some actually land with code contributions has
Hmm.
been amazing. On Power Toys, I've used Image Resizer. I've got fancy zones set up. Um, the new run line, the
Oh yeah,
run line,
Power Toys
you
Run.
know, Power Toys Run is super cool. Um, and then I get I see there's an update, I go into the update, and then I just find another, tool in there to use. Um, that's fun. The integrated Markdown viewer
Mm,
now in for File Explorer
yeah,
is really cool, especially if you're working
yeah,
with Markdown files. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. I'm not actually familiar with the Markdown viewer that much. I normally use VS Code because that's where I'm writing the
okay.
Markdown. So I'll have to check that one out. My favorite is the color picker, weirdly enough, because I often find I have to like grab a color for some mock-up I'm doing, and then I used to take a screenshot, go into Paint, and then change the RGB into hex with like a converter, and then I'd have the thing. But now it's Win-Shift-C will do it, and then I can quickly get to it, and then so much faster.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I think, at least from my side, I mean, this is my team, like Power Toys, WSL, Terminal, it's all my team. I think we've been making a lot of strides towards Windows development improvements. And it's cool to see that like that's coming through the community, and making that experience better for everybody, and that it's a worthwhile initiative, I think, which is pretty cool.
yeah. Windows in general has made huge strides in the developer experience. And Windows 11 itself is just gorgeous. Like it just kind
Yeah.
of gets out of my way. It's smooth. It's clean. The UI is much more consistent. Um, and in general, what I like about Windows is, having come from having been a Mac OS dev for 10 years, several years ago,
Hmm.
is Windows. I get my choice of hardware. I'm
Yes.
not locked into particularly expensive hardware. I'm not locked into a single vendor. So I have my choice of Surface and Lenovo devices, or even the ability to build my own devices. Um, and of course, you also have the option to dual boot Linux. A lot of developers um, have that option. Use that option. But I find that Windows with WSL gives me kind of the best of both worlds. Um, so I'm super enthusiastic about it. And then you can build from Windows for Windows, which is over a billion
Hmm.
devices, server, IoT, desktop, and then with WSL, you can then also build for the same cross section of uh, devices. I even heard from a developer in the WSL GitHub issue section
Mm.
um, who was using WSL to build for macOS, and he needed a tweak in order so he could mount uh, Mac OS drives, so he could copy it over to a Mac OS drive. But you know, even that is happening, and that's
Yeah.
cool too. So, um, yeah, the Windows 11 plus WSL, WSLG, Terminal, Power Toys have made it a powerhouse for Windows and Linux, and now apparently Mac OS development.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome to hear. So something that we briefly mentioned earlier that I want to touch more on is the Windows containers, and cloud native
Sure.
stuff. We were chatting about it earlier before the show, and I know like little to nothing about Windows containers, so I'd love like a synopsis and maybe like a quick demo or something of how that works?
Sure. So, I'm an operating system nerd. I like doing fun things with operating systems and containers and VMs, and Windows containers was new to me as well, and something I picked up. And a lot of people may be familiar with Docker containers from Linux,
Hmm.
um, uh, and a lot of people are then surprised to find out that actually there are Docker containers of Windows. It's a little more nuanced. You can develop with Windows containers on Windows Pro or Windows Enterprise. You have to deploy them to Windows Server, but there's easy ways to do that with tools like Rancher or AKS on Azure, and it's Windows in a container. And there's a lot of advantages there, like the ability to run CI/CD on Windows
Hmm.
applications you may be developing. There's functionality in Windows, that you can leverage, things like DirectX, inside a container,
Yeah.
that aren't present on Linux. So there's some nifty things. It's a little bit of a learning curve. I mean, if you are very much accustomed to Linux containers, you'll find a lot of similarities, but you'll find some nuances like your Windows container, which you pull from Microsoft and build on top of, kind of has to roughly match the version of the Windows server you're going to be deploying to. But you can get started with Windows containers
Hmm.
uh, with Windows Pro or Windows Enterprise. So
Okay.
if you are familiar with the Windows features option to enable WSL, back before WSL dash dash install, enabling containers is right there. And if you're familiar with using either Docker Desktop or either just Docker D.exe, um,
Hmm.
there's even now the successor to that, Container D, has support for Windows, and there's documentation on how to do that. Um, but yeah, let me show you a quick demo. I have a Windows container that I maintain, um, that contains a NIM development environment. So it's got GCC, Git, and the NIM compiler in there. It's on my GitHub. I'm gonna Git clone it. It's fairly small, and then we're gonna go in there, and then you can see my Docker file. Um, those of you who may be familiar with Linux versus Windows can tell I'm very much a Linux person. I'm using ls and
Yeah.
cat in PowerShell, but the great thing is it just works, right?
Hmm.
Um, so uh, if you're familiar with Docker files, you'll see here, uh, we're going to pull from a base image. So you've got a from. We've got some variables in here that would allow me to reuse this Docker file to build for different Windows versions. It's got defaults set, but
Okay.
I could override that because I actually then use GitHub Actions to automatically build this every couple days and push it to GitHub package repository. So
Oh, cool.
yeah, so it not only builds for Windows Server 2022, but also 2019, and it's set to specific known NIM versions, but it will actually it uses some interesting PowerShell to parse the most recent release published to GitHub of NIM and grab it and unpack it and compile it. So yeah, if you can be just as creative with Windows Docker files as you can with Linux Docker files. So here is the Docker file. It gets the basics, and
Hmm.
then compiles just what we need then to run. So I will show you an example of building this. And oh, you know what? I need to be admin, don't I? You know, it wouldn't be a demo if you didn't have um, a fun bug. Um, oh, is Docker not running? Docker was running. Oh, there it goes. Okay. Well, let me.
So when you build and compile this, there's no like UI of a Windows container or anything like that. It's all kind of through the command line.
Right. There
Okay.
is no graphical aspects to Windows Container. You can't run GUIs um, in the container, which is similar. I mean, it's theoretically possible to do that in a Linux container, but of course not advised. Most people don't run GUI apps from Docker containers. Let me go back to StreamYard and share my new uh, application as administrator. Go.
Here we go.
Okay. There we go. So one thing you may note is the size of that base container. So
Hmm.
we are Windows containers have a variety of base images to pull from, everything from about a 30, 40 megabyte mini micro container with just enough to run uh, simple .NET apps, all the way up to a full um, uh, Windows Server image that's 5 gigs that contains the entire not only .NET but Win32 API and then all the server roles you would need and expect on a full Windows Server image, including things like IIS.
Mm.
So this is what I work on now at Rancher, which is part of SUSE.
Hmm.
Um, but it touches on my background in Windows Linux because in order to power these Windows containers, you then actually need Linux worker nodes to actually manage them. So when you're deploying a Windows workload in Kubernetes, uh, taking that Windows container and then deploying it at scale, either on-prem or in the cloud, you then need little Linux workers alongside it to
Hmm.
handle specific tasks. So it's that old chocolate and peanut butter. They go
Yeah.
so well together. Um, so uh, this will take a minute. I don't have the latest server core cached, um, but yeah, the images are also mirrored to Docker Hub, so
Okay.
you can grab them there. But yeah, if you're kind of interested in kind of the WSL and kind of how all this stuff kind of works together, I would consider playing around with Windows containers and
Mm.
seeing what you can do there. Um, uh, if you're a geek and if you're developing on Windows and you haven't considered containerizing your Windows application, particularly if it's a server application or something you would deploy to the cloud, um, give containers a shot. There's a lot of cool stuff happening in this space, a lot of support from upstream Kubernetes, and it's only getting better. So,
Sweet.
uh,
So just like looking at what you've been talking about, since you can specify the Windows version, is this good for testing like backwards compatibility of like multiple iterations of Windows to ensure that your app works on those older versions?
yeah, so I mean, they're targeted towards Windows Server,
Mm.
and right now we have Windows Server 2016, 2019. 2016 is going EOL if it relatively soon. If it's an extended support, um,
Okay.
and then but 2019 is still active. 20H2 is supported, I think at least until the spring. The you have to the container lifecycle, it differs slightly from the server lifecycle. So sometimes I have to go consult the docs just to verify the exact dates. But
Mm,
you can test on 2016, 2019, I believe a 20H2 based image, and now a Windows Server 2022 image now that it's gone GA. Um, but yeah, it does give you some flexibility to test these applications against previous versions. It is geared more towards Windows Server,
mm.
but in terms of being able to CI/CD your applications, you do have some flexibility there to test against different versions.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
So it looks like you're just about done
Oh,
extracting
yeah.
here.
It's pulling the base, and now it's going to actually start building the nim. It's going to get git, and then 7-zip, and then it's Windows containers can be a little bigger. Like you just need a little more
Yeah.
space, you need a little more patience. But once this stuff is cached, it's a lot faster.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
and um, but again, you've got Windows containers all the way from I think they've gotten the micro the nano server image down to about 30-40 megabytes, and the server is down to about 5 gigs. But that includes everything that server includes, including like
Right.
all that Active Directory, IIS, everything you would need to run, an entire Windows server-based farm, basically.
Sweet.
So we
Awesome.
can watch this and come back to it.
Yeah, we're also at time here, so I'm not
Okay.
I I don't know if we want to keep watching the
Yeah. Well,
extraction.
yeah, yeah, no, it's so exciting. But you can find me on GitHub. Sir Redbeard is my GitHub name, and you can go check out my repo for this, and then see not only how I build this with different versions of NIM and different versions of Windows, but then see how I do it in GitHub Actions, and then push it to the GitHub package repository, so that anyone can just come along with a single command and grab the built images.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on. This has been super informative and really cool to hear about how WSL has changed the world of development on Windows.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was good
Well,
seeing you.
yeah, you too. Well, thanks everyone for watching, and we will see you next week.
Great. Thanks.